Hey guys, welcome back to another video at Jensen's Reptiles. Today we are going to be talking about Mexican black king snakes and everything you need to do to keep them happy and healthy. If you haven't got your MBK yet and you're thinking about getting one, hopefully this video has some helpful tips in it. But as usual, if you have any questions, just drop them in the comments below. I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. So let's start out with Enclosure Size. This is Nacho's enclosure. He is my very own MBK. It is a 4 by 2 by 2 foot melamine enclosure. This really is the optimum size for an adult, but bigger is always better. So if you want to go 6 by 2 by 2, fantastic. The more space, the happier your snake will be because they are super curious and really like to explore. This is a good size for an adult snake. Now, if you have a hatchling or a juvenile, by all means, you can go a little bit smaller. Just make sure as they're growing, they've always got enough space to stretch from corner to corner. And I'm talking here front corner to back corner. Even better if they can stretch straight across the enclosure. You know you've got a great size on your hands. MBKs can get between 4 and 5 feet long. Some do grow up to 6 foot, but it's quite rare. And they do live 20 plus years. So if you are thinking about getting one, make sure you're ready for that commitment. You're about to have an animal that lives a long time. If you're young, fantastic, you've got loads and loads of time together, but just make sure that any future commitments you've got coming up, your snake's going to be well looked after, whether it stays at home with your folks, or you can make sure that you can take it with you wherever you move to. But they're fantastic animals. I definitely recommend them as pets. As juveniles, they can be a little bit flighty, same as most small snakes, really. A little bit bitey in some circumstances, but just patience and gentle handling and you're going to have a nice calm snake soon enough. These guys do have a bit of a bad rap, but to be honest, I've not had any issues with Nacho. Whether I'm just really lucky or, you know, the species as a whole is actually fine, I'm not 100% sure. But I think with any snake that's deemed as being a little bit bitey, it's usually because they're small and nervous. So give them space, give them respect, and 9 out of 10 times your snake will be just fine. So we've covered the enclosure size. Now let's talk a little bit about lighting, because here's where things get interesting. I provide Nacho with some LEDs going across the top of his tank. Those are made by White Python. If you're here in the UK, they're fantastic lights. You can kind of just tack onto the row, so you can have as many as you want, as long as you've got a transformer that's ready to cope with them. Now, that keeps his tank illuminated, but we know full well that reptile keeping is getting better. Snakes do benefit from UV. Nacho most likely would benefit from low-level UVB in here. So that's something that I'll try with him in the future. But if you're just setting up your enclosure and you want to give it a go, what I'd recommend is the Arcadia UV floodlight fixture. I'll drop a link in the description below so you can check it out and see what you think. But it's a product I use with a lot of my other snakes and they seem to like it a lot. It gives them a basking area of UV rather than filling the entire enclosure with it, so the snake feels like they can get out of it if they want to. So whether you go with just LEDs or perhaps a UV light as well, you must provide your snake with light. For these animals to function properly, they need to know if it's night or day. The most defensive or aggressive snakes, whatever you really want to label it as, that I've ever seen, have been kept in small, dark, cramped places with no clue if they're getting handled or fed when the door opens. Whereas if you give your snake lighting and you feed them at a particular time of day, they are far more aware of if they're about to be handled or if food is about to be introduced. So hopefully that makes sense. Give it some thought. Next up, we're going to talk about heating. Heating's really simple. I provide heat from above. I think it's far more natural to mimic how the sun works rather than heating from below. King snakes do like to burrow, so if you're providing a substrate like this that they can burrow in, going down and encountering a higher heat makes no sense to the animal. So what you want to do is have heat from above, heating your surface, but as they travel down, it gets cooler. So I use a White Python 150 watt ceramic, which does the job fantastically. I aim for a basking temperature of 30 degrees, ambience, which you can see sitting around 28. And then we're traveling down the thermal gradient and over on the cooler side of the enclosure. It's around 24 degrees in the wintertime, but currently in the summer it's about 26. So it's a little bit warmer all through the enclosure at the moment, but not a huge amount I can do with that because we only have 2 weeks of summer here anyway, and then it's over. But heat-wise, nice and easy to heat the tank with one of these. Again, made by White Python. That includes the ceramic and the guard itself. There is a reflector in there, which means that the heat will bounce around in here and essentially come down rather than being dispersed throughout the top. That means I can achieve that basking temperature with ease. The ceramic itself runs off a pulse proportional thermostat, which I will show you in just a second. But while we're here and we're looking at temperature gauges and whatnot, let's talk a little bit about humidity. Between 35 and 45% humidity is what you want. Mexican black king snakes come from, you know, the very, very most southern states in the US, down through Mexico. So it's pretty warm and dry. When it does rain, it rains a lot, but for a short amount of time. So spikes in humidity are fine, but then that hot sun's really drying things out quite quickly. So you don't really want your humidity going too high, but if your snake is having any trouble shedding, you might want to boost it up a little bit or introduce a humid hide for them. Alright, so I'm very quickly going to show you this stat. This is Nacho's OLED Pulse. This is made by Microclimate, and it has the ability to set a day and night temperature. So Nacho's probe temperature is essentially set to 28 degrees. You can see that the output of power at the moment is 16%. So it's nice to see how hard your stats are working, but also it's nice to be able to control that nighttime temperature drop. He does not need 28 degrees at nighttime. In fact, a lot of parts of Mexico get pretty cold during the night, especially the deserts. So his will drop to 24 degrees at night, and it's working really well for him at the moment. And it's also working quite well for my energy bill. So I would definitely recommend getting your hands on one of these stats if you're in the market for one. Alright, so we've covered lighting, we've covered heating. Let's talk a little bit about the rest of the things that kind of fill the enclosure. Starting with the substrate. So there are a variety of substrates that you can use, but we covered humidity and we do want to keep this place kind of dry. So I like to use Lignocell. It's a lot finer and softer than aspen, and it's not dusty. Now it does get everywhere, so you want to keep a vacuum cleaner close by. We actually have a handheld vacuum cleaner in the snake room, pretty much for this very reason. But the snakes can burrow in this really easily. They can also kind of turn circles on the top of it and compact it like sand. If they do get any in their mouth while they're eating, it goes straight through. It's really no worry whatsoever. So as a substrate, it's really good. You can kind of make it as deep as you want. So you can see here, we go for about an inch and a half, which is ample amount for Nacho to burrow in, which he does from time to time, and it's really cute. Kind of just pop his head up out of the substrate, and the game is to essentially find his tail. But yeah, it's a really great substrate to use. We buy it in bulk, but I think you can get it from most reptile stores here in the UK, to be honest. So definitely recommend that. Now, something I actually don't talk about a whole lot, I always seem to forget, is water. Provide your snake with a water bowl. Kind of goes without saying, they like to have a drink, so make sure they've got nice fresh water every day. We use filtered water for our snakes, but you can definitely pour some tap water, leave it out so the chlorine evaporates off. That is it, obviously, if your water is safe to drink. If you're in the UK, no issues. I know if you're in the US, you might want to give that some second thought, depending on where you live. And other countries as well, if your water isn't safe to drink from the tap, it's probably best not to give it to your animals as well. Maybe even looking into some rainwater filters or whatever might be a great option if you don't want to buy loads of plastic bottles from the shop. But you want to provide a nice big water bowl. It's quite rare for an MBK to soak, but you know, it's nice to have the option, isn't it? So a bowl that's big enough to kind of sit in and at least, you know, squirm around in there for a bit. Other than that, I've kind of filled Nacho's enclosure with branches. So he's got some grapevine over here, some liana vines, also these kind of twisty bendy artificial vines that you can get from most reptile stores. Things like this, whilst, you know, it's mainly for me to look at and say, oh yeah, that's cool. But Nacho can go through there and use it as a little lookout, which frequently we'll see him with his head poking out of these. Anytime you use anything like that, firstly make sure that your snake's body can travel through these holes, but also check the insides for any sharp points. With Nacho in particular, we actually bought him a hide, which is one of these Exoterra hides, that had this really sharp point inside of it, and it was slicing his scales every time he turned a circle inside the hide. And for a few days we couldn't figure out why his scales were damaged. And then of course checked everything, and there was a sharp point in there that we'd missed. So anytime you buy anything made of resin, have a little look. You might want to just sand it down and make sure it's nice and smooth. Make sure that your snake can't get stuck in eye holes or whatever holes there are in these bits of decor, and then you're good to go. Essentially though, you want to provide a nice environment for your snake to hang out in, whilst at the same time having something nice to look at for yourself. I always feel that, you know, in keeping snakes, they themselves are beautiful, but they're not out all of the time. So if these are features in your home, then personally I enjoy to you know, make them look like something that I want to look at, as well as something that's really cool and functional for my animal to use. And it's really, really rewarding to build something and to see your snake using the whole thing, which Nacho does every single night without fail. Speaking of Nacho, it would probably be quite cool in this video about MBKs if I showed you him. So I'm going to get him out now. I'll get the camera back on, and you can see the little guy. Okay, so this is Nacho. He is a 3-year-old MBK. And he's about 3.5 feet, 4 feet long. He's currently fed on medium to large mice every 2 weeks. These snakes, like any snake really, can become overweight really easily if they're not exercised well and if they're not fed the proper amount. So something definitely to keep an eye on with your snake. Make sure you have a good feeding schedule, and you should have a really happy snake. You can see Nacho's really easy to handle. Can handle him with one hand happily, and when it's time to go back in the enclosure, there's no fuss, there's no big deal. He'll happily just hop back in and either hide away or kind of just hide his face and think the rest is hidden. But yeah, so that is my information about Mexican black king snakes, how to keep them happy and healthy. Hope you enjoyed. If you do have any questions, drop them in the comments below. If you'd like to see more of Nacho and my other animals, follow me on Instagram. It's just @JensensReptiles. If you haven't subscribed already, go on. And if you enjoyed the video, give it a like. And I'll catch up with you guys soon.